The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine corridors of the Terran Compliance Ministry in Geneva, where Director Sarah Chan reviewed the daily reports with the same careful attention she had given them for the past 15 years. Every document bore the familiar header of the Galactic Council's Administrative Division, every page stamped with humanity's assigned designation. Species classification 7 Alpha, developmental status, supervised integration. Sarah's fingers traced the latest directive as she read aloud to her deputy, Marcus Webb. Regulation 847. C requires all human industrial facilities to maintain operational efficiency below 73.2% of theoretical maximum to prevent excessive resource consumption that might impact established trade routes. She set the tablet down with practice calm. Effective immediately. Marcus shifted in his chair, the same restless energy that had marked his 20 years of service showing in the tightness around his eyes. That's the third efficiency reduction this quarter. The Centauri Mining Collective is expanding their operations in the same sector, but somehow this only applies to us. The Council's wisdom guides all member species toward optimal galactic harmony. Sarah recited the standard response, though the words felt increasingly hollow in her mouth. She had been saying variations of this phrase since she was a young diplomat fresh out of the academy, back when first contact with the Galactic Council had been humanity's greatest dream come true. The reality had been somewhat different than the dream. The first Council ships had arrived in Earth's orbit on a Tuesday morning in October 2157, their massive vessels appearing silently above every major city simultaneously. For 3 days, the world had held its breath, every communication channel focused skyward, every military installation placed on the highest alert status. Then, the ships had broadcast a simple message in perfect, unaccented English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, and dozens of other human languages. We welcome Earth to the galactic community. Please prepare your representatives for formal integration proceedings. Sarah remembered watching the footage as a child, her parents, and every other human on the planet glued to their screens as the first Council delegation descended to the United Nations building in New York. The beings that emerged from the sleek shuttles had been a collection of species that seemed pulled from humanity's wildest science fiction dreams. The Altarians, tall and graceful with their crystalline skin that reflected light in prismatic patterns. The stocky, four-armed Rigelians whose every movement spoke of immense physical strength. The ethereal vegan seers, whose large eyes seemed to look through reality itself. At their head had walked Ambassador Zeth Kaler of the Arcturus Dominion, a being whose very presence commanded attention. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, his elongated skull housed a brain case that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, while his 6-fingered hands gestured with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed across 1,000 star systems. Humans of Earth, he had announced to the assembled world leaders, you stand at the threshold of a new age. The Galactic Council extends its guidance to your species, as it has for over 12,000 of your years to countless worlds. You will learn the proper ways of civilized interaction, the necessary limitations that prevent chaos, and the grateful acceptance that marks a mature species. The words have been beautiful, full of promise and hope. The reality that followed had been an education in a very different kind of civilization. Sarah's thoughts returned to the present as Marcus continued reading through the morning's directives. Here's an interesting one. The Cultural Preservation Committee is requiring all human artistic works to be submitted for harmony evaluation before public distribution. Apparently, our music contains aggressive frequencies that might disturb other species. Mozart is too violent for galactic sensibilities? Sarah asked, though she was no longer surprised by such pronouncements. Over the years, the Council's guidance had touched every aspect of human life. Human literature was too confrontational, the heroes too defiant, the conflicts too dramatic. Human sports were too competitive. The Olympics had been reduced to a series of gentle exhibitions that emphasized participation over achievement. Even human food was considered problematic. The spices too intense, the flavors too complex for proper digestive harmony. Each restriction came with detailed explanations about galactic standards, about the need for newcomer species to understand their place in the established order. Each directive was phrased as helpful guidance from elder species who had learned these lessons long ago. Each new limitation was presented as a privilege, the chance to be shaped by wisdom accumulated across millennia. Marcus set down his tablet and rubbed his temples. My daughter asked me yesterday why we have to get permission from aliens to build a playground in our own city. I told her it was complicated, but honestly, Sarah, I'm not sure I remember why anymore. Sarah understood the frustration. She had felt it herself countless times, a slow-burning ember that she had learned to contain and ignore. The Council's integration process was undeniably effective. Earth's technology had advanced dramatically, human lifespans had nearly doubled, and diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia had been eliminated with galactic medicine. Poverty had been largely abolished through optimized resource distribution algorithms provided by Council economists. War between human nations had become impossible under the careful mediation of Council peacekeepers. The price for these gifts had been simple: complete compliance with galactic standards, total acceptance of Council authority, and the grateful acknowledgement that humanity was, in all ways that mattered, the student rather than the teacher. "There's one more thing," Marcus said, his voice carrying a strange note that made Sarah look up sharply. "A communication from the Council's Developmental Assessment Division. They're scheduling a comprehensive review of Earth's integration progress." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Comprehensive reviews were rare, typically conducted only when the Council was considering a species for either advancement to full membership status or reclassification to protected status. The latter option meant the complete removal of self-governance, with Council administrators taking direct control of all planetary functions. "When?" she asked. "Next month. Ambassador Zeth Kaler will personally conduct the evaluation, along with representatives from 12 other Council species." Marcus paused, checking his notes. "They'll be reviewing our compliance records, cultural adaptation metrics, and overall contribution to galactic stability." "Our contribution to galactic stability," Sarah repeated. "In 300 years of membership, humanity's primary contribution to the galaxy had been its willingness to follow instructions. Human colonies had been established on dozens of worlds, but always under Council oversight, always following Council-approved development patterns. Human scientists had made discoveries, but only within research parameters established by Council academics. Human artists created works that passed harmony evaluations. Human engineers built structures that met galactic safety standards, and human leaders made decisions that fell within Council-approved guidelines. Humanity had become the galaxy's most successful student, which was precisely the problem. Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Sarah, there's something else. Something that's not in any official report." He glanced around the empty office, checking for the subtle monitoring devices that were a standard feature of all government buildings. "I've been in contact with some people, off-channel communications with other human colonies. There are discussions happening." "What kind of discussions?" "The kind that would be considered non-compliant if the Council knew about them." Marcus pulled out a small device that Sarah recognized as a signal jammer, an old piece of human technology that predated Council oversight. "There's a group calling itself the Heritage Foundation. Scientists, engineers, historians, military personnel from across human space. They've been documenting things." "What kind of things?" "Everything the Council has made us forget. Old human technologies that were deemed unnecessarily aggressive. Historical records of human achievements that don't fit the narrative of grateful students. Military doctrines and strategic thinking that the Council classified as destabilizing to peaceful species." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. What Marcus was describing wasn't just non-compliant. It was potentially treasonous under Council law. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because in 2 weeks, the Heritage Foundation is planning to release everything. Every suppressed human innovation, every hidden achievement, every piece of evidence that shows what humanity was capable of before the Council's guidance." Marcus met her eyes. and because they want to know if the compliance ministry is going to stand with humanity or with the council when that happens. The weight of the moment settled over Sarah like a physical presence. For 3 centuries, her entire purpose had been to help humanity navigate the delicate balance of council membership, to ensure that her species remained in the galaxy's good graces. She had spent her entire career building relationships with council administrators, learning their protocols, anticipating their needs, and smoothing over any rough edges in human behavior that might cause concern. Now Marcus was asking her to choose between the life she had built and the species she had spent that life trying to protect. What makes them think anything will change? She asked. The Council has 12,000 years of experience dealing with upstart species. They've probably faced this exact situation dozens of times. Maybe, Marcus said, but they've never faced it with humans. Before Sarah could respond, her communication panel chimed with an incoming priority message. The sender's designation made her blood run cold. Direct communication from Ambassador Zeth Kaler, personal priority, level 1. She opened the message with trembling fingers, reading the text that appeared in the flowing script of formal council communication. Director Chun, it has come to our attention that certain elements within human space may be engaging in activities contrary to the spirit of grateful membership. We trust that the Terran Compliance Ministry remains committed to the harmony that has characterized human council relations for these many productive years. We look forward to discussing these matters during our upcoming comprehensive review. May your species continue to learn wisdom. Sarah stared at the message, her mind racing. The council knew. Somehow, despite all the Heritage Foundation's precautions, the council was aware that something was stirring within humanity. How? Marcus asked, reading the message over her shoulder. Sarah shook her head. It doesn't matter how. What matters is what we do now. She stood up, moving to the window that looked out over Geneva's skyline. In the distance, she could see the spires of the council's regional administrative complex, their alien architecture a constant reminder of Earth's place in the galactic order. For 300 years, humanity had been the perfect student. They had learned every lesson, followed every rule, and accepted every limitation with grateful humility. They had allowed themselves to be shaped into something smaller, something safer, something that fit neatly into the Council's vision of proper galactic citizenship. But, as Sarah stood there, looking out at the world her species had built under Council guidance, she found herself wondering about the world they might have built on their own. The technologies they might have developed, the problems they might have solved, the heights they might have reached if they had been allowed to reach for them. Marcus, she said quietly, tell me about this Heritage Foundation. Tell me everything they've found. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of encrypted files, suppressed documents, and forbidden knowledge. Marcus had come prepared with more than just warnings. He had brought a portable data core containing 3 centuries' worth of hidden history. Sarah learned about the human fusion drive technology that could have cut interstellar travel time by 60%, deemed too aggressive for peaceful species, and quietly shelved in favor of Council-approved propulsion systems. She read about the agricultural innovations that could have increased food production across the galaxy, rejected because they might disrupt established trade relationships. She discovered military innovations that had been classified, not because they were destructive, but because they were too effective, defensive technologies that would have made human worlds nearly impregnable, tactical doctrines that turned humanity's supposed weaknesses into devastating advantages. Most disturbing of all, she learned about the other species who had once shown similar promise, similar innovation, similar defiance. The archaeological records were fragmentary, carefully edited, but the pattern was clear. Species that pushed too hard against Council limitations tended to suffer unfortunate setbacks. Economic collapses that required Council intervention. Political instabilities that demanded Council peacekeepers. Cultural degradations that necessitated Council cultural preservation measures. The lucky ones were simply absorbed into the Council's bureaucracy, their best minds recruited into positions where they could do no harm. The unlucky ones were reclassified. How many? Sarah asked. The Heritage Foundation estimates at least 47 species over the past 12,000 years, Marcus replied, all of them showing what the Council's documents describe as excessive innovative tendencies or insufficient appreciation for established protocols. Sarah closed the final file and leaned back in her chair. The magnitude of what she had learned pressed down on her like a physical weight. Humanity wasn't the Council's greatest success story. They were its latest project. 300 years of careful management, subtle suppression, and gradual diminishment, all designed to transform a species that had once reached for the stars into something smaller, safer, and more manageable. What does the Heritage Foundation want from me? She asked. Nothing yet. But when the review begins, when Ambassador Zkeller starts asking questions about human loyalty and compliance, they want to know that the official representative of human cooperation isn't going to help him bury us. Sarah stood up and walked to her office safe, inputting the complex security code that protected her most sensitive documents. From inside, she withdrew a slim folder marked with the highest classification levels of both human and Council security protocols. I've been keeping records too, she said, handing the folder to Marcus. Every meeting with Council representatives, every private conversation, every subtle threat disguised as friendly guidance. I've been documenting everything for 15 years, telling myself it was for historical purposes. Marcus opened the folder and scanned the first few pages, his eyes widening as he read. Sarah, this is evidence that the Council has been systematically lying to humanity since day one, she finished. Evidence that every species they've guided has been subject to the same treatment. Evidence that the grateful compliance they prize so highly is actually a form of slow-motion conquest. She moved to her communication console and began typing a message, her fingers steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. What are you doing? Marcus asked. Sending a response to Ambassador Zkeller, Sarah replied. I'm going to tell him that the Terran Compliance Ministry is looking forward to the comprehensive review and that we have a great deal to discuss about humanity's place in the galactic community. She paused before sending the message, her finger hovering over the transmission key. Once she sent this, there would be no going back. Her career, her life, her entire understanding of humanity's place in the universe would be fundamentally changed. But as she thought about her predecessor, Director Walsh, who had died still believing that humanity's role was to be grateful students forever, she realized that some things were more important than careers. She pressed the key. The message transmitted, disappearing into the vast communication network that connected Earth to the farthest reaches of Council space. In a few hours, it would reach Ambassador Zkeller, wherever he was in the galaxy. In a few days, he would read it and begin to understand that something had changed in humanity's attitude toward grateful compliance. In a few weeks, when the comprehensive review began, both humanity and the Council would discover what happened when Earth's 3 centuries of silence finally came to an end. Sarah Chun, director of the Terran Compliance Ministry, closed her office and went home to prepare for war. The abandoned mining facility on Luna's far side looked exactly like what it was supposed to be, a failed extraction operation shut down after the Council's optimization committee determined that human lunar mining was inefficient compared to established Regellian operations in the same sector. The official records showed the facility had been sealed 15 years ago, another casualty of humanity's integration into the galactic economy. Dr. Elena Vasquez knew better. As she guided her maintenance shuttle through the facility's cargo bay, she could see the subtle signs that marked this place as something far more significant than a dead mine. The power readings were too consistent for an abandoned facility. The atmospheric processors were running at full capacity despite having no official reason to operate. Most telling of all, the quantum communication array, hidden beneath the facility's central hub, was currently handling more data traffic than most planetary government centers. Elena had discovered the Heritage Foundation 6 months ago, purely by accident. As the head of xenoarchaeology at Earth's Luna University, she had been researching pre-contact human artifacts when she stumbled across discrepancies in the official timeline. technologies that officially hadn't existed until after Council contact, but which appeared in archaeological records dating back decades before first contact. Innovations that had supposedly been developed with Council guidance, but which showed clear evolutionary traces of earlier human research. The deeper she dug, the more inconsistencies she found. Entire research programs that had vanished from official records. Scientists whose careers had ended abruptly right around first contact. Archaeological sites that had been sealed off-limits for cultural preservation, but which contained evidence of human technological achievements that predated Council influence. When she had finally worked up the courage to publish her findings, the response had been swift and decisive. Her research grant had been revoked for pursuing non-productive investigations. Her archaeological permits had been suspended pending review of research priorities. Her university position had been placed under administrative evaluation by the Education Harmony Commission. 2 days later, a maintenance worker at Luna University had left a small device in her laboratory, a communication node that connected her to a network she hadn't even known existed. Now, 3 months after joining the Heritage Foundation, Elena was one of their primary researchers, part of a team working to reconstruct 3 centuries of suppressed human history. The scale of the operation still amazed her. Hidden facilities on 12 human worlds, connected by a communication network that used obsolete human encryption protocols the Council had never bothered to study. Thousands of researchers, engineers, historians, and others working in complete secrecy to preserve and recover the knowledge that humanity had been systematically encouraged to forget. Elena's shuttle settled into the facility's landing bay, and she was met by Dr. James Morrison, a former military engineer whose official career had ended when he questioned the logic of dismantling human defense satellites that might appear threatening to peaceful species. Unofficially, he had spent the last 20 years designing the defensive systems that protected Heritage Foundation facilities from Council surveillance. "Any trouble getting here?" James asked as they walked through corridors that hummed with hidden activity. "The usual checkpoint delays, but nothing suspicious," Elena replied. "The Council's lunar monitoring station still thinks this place is dead rock. How long can you maintain the illusion?" "As long as we need to. The beauty of human redundancy engineering is that we built backups for our backups. When the Council forced us to shut down the surface operations, we just moved underground and kept working." James led her deeper into the facility, past laboratories where teams of scientists worked on projects that would have been impossible under Council oversight. "Though I have to admit, things are getting more complicated." They entered a vast chamber that served as the facility's command center, its walls lined with displays showing data streams from across human space. At the center of the room, a dozen people sat around a conference table, their faces reflecting the tension that had been building for weeks. Elena recognized most of them. Dr. Sarah Chun, whose recent defection from the Compliance Ministry had sent shockwaves through the Foundation's leadership. General Patricia Reyes, who had supposedly retired from the Human Defense Force, but whose strategic expertise had been invaluable in planning the Foundation's security protocols. Professor David Kim, whose economic analyses had revealed the true cost of humanity's integration into the Council's trade system. At the head of the table sat Admiral Maria Santos, the Foundation's unofficial leader and one of the few people who remembered humanity before Council contact. At 97 years old, she had been a young naval officer when the Council ships first arrived, and she had spent the subsequent decades watching her species slowly surrender everything that had made them uniquely human. "Elena," Admiral Santos said as she approached, "thank you for coming. We need your expertise more than ever." Elena took her seat at the table, noting the grim expressions around her. "What's happened?" General Reyes spoke first. 3 days ago, our monitoring stations detected unusual Council fleet movements. Ships from 7 different species, all converging on strategic positions around human space. They're not being subtle about it. "How unusual?" Elena asked. "The largest Council fleet deployment in human space since first contact," Dr. Kim replied, consulting his tablet. According to our intelligence sources, Ambassador Zeth Kaler has requested additional resources for the upcoming comprehensive review of Earth's integration status. Elena felt a chill run through her. Additional resources for a routine evaluation? It gets worse, Sarachin said. I've been in contact with my sources, still inside the compliance ministry. The Council isn't just reviewing Earth. They're conducting simultaneous comprehensive reviews of every major human colony. 37 worlds, all being evaluated at the same time. Admiral Santos leaned forward. In 12,000 years of Council history, there have been only 4 instances of simultaneous comprehensive reviews involving an entire species. 3 of those species were subsequently reclassified to protected status. The 4th simply disappeared from the galactic community entirely. The implications hung heavy in the air. Elena had studied the archaeological evidence of the disappeared species, what little remained after the Council's cultural preservation efforts. Advanced civilizations reduced to museum exhibits and historical footnotes, their worlds administered by Council bureaucrats, their people scattered across the galaxy as individual refugees rather than a unified culture. How long do we have? Elena asked. The reviews begin in 2 weeks, Sarah replied. But our timeline has been accelerated. We can't wait any longer to release what we've found. Professor Kim activated the room's main display, showing a complex flowchart that outlined the Foundation's research findings. Elena, your archaeological work has been crucial in establishing the baseline. We now have documented proof of human technological capabilities from before Council contact, along with evidence of systematic suppression of those capabilities after integration. The display shifted, showing comparative timelines. Elena could see the pattern clearly. Human innovation rates had actually declined after Council contact, despite the supposed benefits of galactic technology sharing. More tellingly, the rate of decline exactly matched similar patterns observed in the archaeological records of other species that had undergone Council integration. We've identified the mechanism, Dr. Morrison added. The Council doesn't conquer species through force. They conquer them through dependency. They provide advanced technologies that make older human innovations seem primitive, then gradually restrict access to the knowledge needed to maintain or improve those technologies. Within a few generations, the subject species loses the ability to develop independently. Elena studied the data, seeing her own research reflected in a larger pattern. The archaeological sites they've sealed off, those contain evidence of our original capabilities, don't they? Exactly. And not just on Earth. Every human colony has similar sites, all sealed for cultural preservation, all containing evidence of what we were capable of before we learned to be grateful. Admiral Santos stood up, moving to a wall display that showed the current positions of human and Council fleets. The question is, what do we do with this knowledge? General Reyes pulled up another set of displays, these showing technical schematics that Elena didn't recognize. We've been doing more than just research. Using Elena's archaeological data and Morrison's engineering expertise, we've been rebuilding. The defensive technologies the Council made us abandon, the propulsion systems they deemed too aggressive, the weapons systems they classified as unnecessarily destructive. Elena stared at the schematics, recognizing design elements from her archaeological work. You've been building ships, 17 of them, hidden in facilities like this one throughout human space, Morrison confirmed. Each one incorporating technologies that officially don't exist, powered by fusion systems that officially were never developed, armed with weapons that officially were never conceived. The Council's fleet movements suggest they suspect something, Sarah said. Our intelligence indicates that Ambassador Zeth Kaler has been receiving reports of unusual energy signatures from human space. They don't know what we're doing yet, but they know we're doing something. Admiral Santos returned to her seat, her expression resolute. Which brings us to why we needed you here, Elena. Your archaeological work has given us the technical knowledge to rebuild our capabilities, but we need more than that. We need to understand how the Council has done this before, how they've managed the transition from independent species to dependent clients. Elena opened her personal research files, displaying her most recent findings. I've been studying the pattern across multiple species. The Council's integration process follows a specific timeline. First contact, followed by a honeymoon period where the subject species receives significant technological and medical benefits. This creates gratitude and dependency. Next comes the gradual introduction of limitations, always framed as necessary for galactic harmony. Finally, if the species shows signs of resistance or independent development, comes the comprehensive review. And after the comprehensive review, Professor Kim asked, reclassification to protected status or worse. Elena pulled up images from archaeological sites across the galaxy. I found evidence of at least 12 species that simply vanished after their comprehensive reviews. Not destroyed, absorbed. Their populations scattered, their worlds redistributed, their cultures preserved only in council museums. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity wasn't just facing political subjugation. They were facing cultural extinction. There's one more thing, Elena continued. In every case I've studied, the species that disappeared shared common characteristics. High innovation rates, strong military traditions, and, most importantly, a tendency toward individual initiative rather than collective compliance. Exactly the characteristics that define humanity, General Reyes observed. Admiral Santos stood again, this time moving to a secure communication console. Then, we have our answer. The Council isn't conducting a routine review. They're preparing for humanity's final integration. The question is whether we're going to submit quietly like every other species, or whether we're going to show them why Earth remained silent for so long. She activated the console, establishing secure connections to Heritage Foundation cells across human space. One by one, faces appeared on the display. Scientists from Proxima Centauri, engineers from Wolf 359, military officers from Tau Ceti, researchers from dozens of other human worlds. Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Santos announced, Operation Renaissance is now active. All Foundation cells are to begin final preparations immediately. Dr. Vasquez's archaeological evidence, Dr. Morrison's technical specifications, and General Reyes' tactical doctrines are being transmitted to all facilities as of this moment. Elena watched as data streams flowed across the room's displays. 3 centuries of suppressed knowledge spreading through the hidden network that connected humanity's surviving innovators. Technologies that predated Council contact, refined and improved by decades of secret research. Military doctrines that turned humanity's supposed weaknesses into tactical advantages. Historical records that proved beyond doubt what humans had been capable of before they learned to be grateful students. What exactly are we preparing for? One of the remote participants asked. Admiral Santos smiled, and for the first time since Elena had known her, it was the smile of someone who was no longer hiding. We're preparing to remind the Galactic Council why they should have left humanity alone. Over the next 6 hours, Elena watched the Heritage Foundation transform from a research organization into something far more dangerous. Hidden facilities across human space began activating equipment that had been built in secret over decades. Ships that officially didn't exist began moving toward predetermined positions. Communication networks that used obsolete human protocols began coordinating activities that the Council's surveillance systems couldn't detect. Most importantly, human colonies began receiving data packages that contained everything the Heritage Foundation had discovered. The suppressed technologies, the hidden history, the archaeological evidence of humanity's true capabilities. For the first time in 3 centuries, humans across the galaxy were learning what their species had been capable of before the Council's guidance. Elena found herself assigned to a new role, working with Dr. Morrison to analyze the Council's own archaeological sites. If humanity was going to confront the Council, they needed to understand their opponent's true capabilities, not just the carefully managed image they presented to client species. The Council worlds are old, Morrison explained as they reviewed stellar cartographic data. Some of them have been inhabited for 50,000 years or more. If we can access their archaeological sites, we might learn about their own technological development, their own history of conquest and integration. Assuming they haven't destroyed that evidence, Elena replied. That's where human archaeology differs from council methods, Morrison said with a grin. They preserve cultures by putting them in museums. We preserve cultures by teaching people to remember. As Elena worked through the night, analyzing data from across the galaxy and coordinating with researchers on dozens of worlds, she began to understand the true scope of what the Heritage Foundation had become. Not just a preservation society or a research organization, but the seat of something that hadn't existed in human space for 3 centuries, a unified human response to external threat. The Council had spent centuries teaching humanity to be grateful, compliant, and peaceful. They had systematically removed every technological, cultural, and strategic advantage that might make humans difficult to manage. They had turned a species that had once reached for the stars into a collection of grateful students who knew their place in the galactic order. But in their thoroughness, they had made one critical mistake. They had assumed that gratitude, compliance, and peace were natural human characteristics rather than learned behaviors. They had never considered what might happen if humans simply stopped learning those lessons. As the data streams continued to flow across the command center's displays, Elena realized that Ambassador Zethkaler's comprehensive review was going to be very different from what the Council expected. For the first time in 12,000 years, they were going to encounter a species that had learned their lessons too well, and then forgotten them on purpose. The question was whether humanity could remember enough of what they used to be to survive what was coming next. Ambassador Zethkaler stood on the observation deck of the Council flagship Eternal Harmony, watching Earth grow larger in the viewport as the massive vessel approached humanity's homeworld. In his 6 centuries of service to the Council, he had conducted 47 comprehensive reviews, each one following the same predictable pattern. Initial resistance from the subject species, followed by gradual acceptance as they recognized the futility of opposing 12,000 years of galactic civilization. The humans would be no different. They had shown remarkable compliance during their integration period, adapting to Council guidance with an efficiency that had made them a model for other developing species. Their leaders were reasonable, their populations docile, and their technological development safely channeled into approved areas. By all measures, humanity represented one of the Council's greatest integration successes, which made the recent anomalies all the more puzzling. Status report. Zethkaler commanded, his bioluminescent cranium pulsing with the measured rhythms that indicated deep thought. Subcommander Veltar, a Rigelian whose 4 arms moved in precise coordination as he operated his control interface, responded immediately. Long-range sensors show normal activity across all human colonies. No unusual fleet movements, no unauthorized construction projects, no signs of organized resistance. However, Zethkaler's head patterns shifted to the more aggressive frequencies that indicated impatience. The energy signatures we detected 3 weeks ago have intensified. Our technical analysis suggests the humans are operating some form of advanced fusion technology, but our databases show no record of them possessing such capabilities. Zethkaler moved to the flagship's central tactical display, where a 3-dimensional map showed the positions of Council and human forces throughout local space. The human forces looked pathetically inadequate, a handful of outdated patrol vessels, orbital defense platforms that were more symbolic than functional, and space infrastructure that relied entirely on Council-approved technologies. Show me the energy signatures. The display shifted, highlighting dozens of locations across human space where unusual energy readings had been detected. The signatures were inconsistent with any known human technology, but they also didn't match any recognized Council systems. Most troubling of all, they seem to be increasing in both intensity and frequency. Analysis? Zeth Kaler demanded. Unknown, sir. The signatures don't correspond to any technology in our databases. The closest match would be early-stage fusion research, but humans were never permitted to develop fusion technology independently. All their current systems are based on approved council power cells. Zeth Kaler studied the display, his vast experience with developing species providing context that his subordinates lacked. In 12,000 years of galactic civilization, the Council had encountered every possible form of technological development. They had seen species that attempted to hide advanced weapons, others that tried to develop prohibited technologies in secret, and still others that sought to reverse engineer Council systems for their own purposes. But the energy signatures from human space didn't match any of these patterns. They were too sophisticated to be primitive fusion experiments, too consistent to be random research efforts, and too widespread to be isolated incidents. Whatever the humans were doing, they were doing it with a level of coordination that should have been impossible given their carefully managed technological base. Subcommander, bring up the integration files for humanity. I want to review their technological development timeline. The display changed again, showing a detailed chronology of human technological advancement since first contact. The pattern was exactly what Zeth Kaler expected to see. Rapid initial growth as humans absorb Council technologies, followed by a gradual leveling off as they reach the approved limits of their development. No unauthorized breakthroughs, no prohibited research, no signs of the innovative aggression that marked species destined for reclassification. Cross-reference the energy signatures with pre-contact human capabilities, he ordered. Veltar's forearms moved across his controls with practiced efficiency. Pre-contact human technology was primitive by Council standards, sir. Chemical rockets, fission power, basic electronics. Nothing that would produce these energy signatures. But as the data compiled, Zeth Kaler noticed something that made his head patterns shift to frequencies of concern. The energy signatures, when analyzed against human pre-contact technology, showed clear developmental lineages. They weren't based on stolen Council technology or reverse-engineered systems. They were evolutionary improvements of original human innovations. Impossible, he murmured. We monitored their technological development from a moment of first contact. All advanced human research was redirected into approved channels. Perhaps we missed something? Veltar suggested. Zeth Kaler turned away from the display, his mind racing through possibilities. In his centuries of experience, he had seen species attempt to hide technological development before. The usual pattern involved trying to continue prohibited research in secret, hoping to achieve breakthrough capabilities before the Council noticed. Such attempts always failed because the subject species invariably lacked the theoretical foundations needed for truly advanced development. But the humans had possessed those foundations. Their pre-contact civilization had been on the verge of significant technological breakthroughs when the Council arrived. Fusion power, advanced propulsion, sophisticated computer systems, all within their reach if they had been allowed to continue their independent development. The Council's standard integration protocol required that such research be abandoned in favor of proven galactic technologies. It was more efficient to provide advanced systems than to allow primitive species to reinvent them poorly. More importantly, it prevented the development of unauthorized capabilities that might prove difficult to control later. Subcommander, I want a complete review of our integration oversight. Every human research facility, every technological development, every scientific breakthrough since first contact. If they've been hiding something, I want to know how. As Veltar began compiling the requested data, Zeth Kaler moved to his private communication suite to contact the Council's intelligence division. If humanity had somehow managed to continue prohibited research for 3 centuries without detection, it represented a failure of oversight that had implications far beyond a simple comprehensive review. The response from intelligence was swift and concerning. Agent Kralix, a vegan seer whose telepathic abilities made her invaluable for detecting deception, appeared on the communication display within minutes of his request. Ambassador Zithkaler, she said, her large eyes reflecting the kind of disturbed patterns that indicated significant concern. We have been monitoring unusual communication patterns in human space for several weeks. Encrypted data streams using obsolete human protocols distributed through networks that predate our surveillance infrastructure. What kind of communications? Technical data, historical records, and what appears to be coordination protocols for some form of organized activity. The encryption is too sophisticated for us to break quickly, but the volume and distribution patterns suggest a network of significant size and complexity. Zethkaler felt a cold certainty settle in his mind. The humans weren't just hiding technological development. They were hiding an entire parallel civilization. Somehow, over 3 centuries of careful oversight, they had maintained and developed capabilities that should have been impossible to conceal. How extensive is this network? Our preliminary analysis suggests it spans all major human colonies, with primary nodes located in supposedly abandoned facilities throughout human space. The network appears to have been growing for decades, possibly longer, and we never detected it. Agent Kralix's eye patterns shifted to frequencies of embarrassment. The network uses communication protocols that predate our integration of humanity into standard galactic systems. We have not been monitoring obsolete human technologies because they were assumed to be non-functional. The magnitude of the oversight failure was staggering. For 3 centuries, while the Council had been monitoring human activities through their integrated systems, the humans have been maintaining an entirely separate technological base using their own obsolete equipment. Equipment that was obsolete only by Council standards, but which had apparently been sufficient for their purposes. Agent Kralix, I need a full analysis of this network immediately. If the humans have been preparing something for 3 centuries, I need to know what it is before we begin the comprehensive review. Already in progress, Ambassador. However, our preliminary findings suggest that whatever the humans are planning, it's scheduled to coincide with your arrival at Earth. Zethkaler terminated the communication and returned to the tactical display, studying the positions of his fleet with new understanding. He had brought 12 ships to human space, a substantial force by any measure, but one intended primarily for demonstration rather than combat. The purpose of a comprehensive review was to impress the subject species with the Council's overwhelming superiority, not to engage in actual conflict. But if the humans had been preparing for 3 centuries, if they had maintained and developed technologies that the Council had assumed were lost, then the situation was far more complex than a simple review of integration progress. Subcommander, activate long-range tactical scanning. I want detailed analysis of every human facility, every orbital platform, every energy signature in the system. If they're hiding something, I want to know what it is. As the flagship's sensors began their detailed sweep of human space, Zethkaler reviewed what he knew about humanity's pre-contact capabilities. They had been a remarkably innovative species with technological development rates that had actually exceeded most galactic norms. Their military thinking had been sophisticated, their strategic planning complex, and their response to challenges creative rather than conventional. All characteristics that the Council had worked carefully to suppress during the integration process. But what if the suppression hadn't been as complete as they believed? What if humanity had simply learned to hide their true capabilities behind a facade of grateful compliance? The sensor returns began appearing on the tactical display, and Zethkaler felt his certainty about the outcome of this review begin to crumble. The energy signatures weren't coming from research facilities or experimental installations. They were coming from what appeared to be fully operational industrial complexes, hidden beneath the surface of supposedly abandoned facilities. More concerning still, detailed analysis revealed that these facilities were producing refined materials consistent with advanced ship construction. Not just any ships, vessels incorporating design principles that the Council's databases didn't recognize. Subcommander, how many ships could these facilities have produced? Veltar's calculations appeared on the display within seconds. Based on the energy consumption and material processing rates, we're detecting potentially dozens of vessels. However, sir, there are no ships visible on our sensors. Because they're hiding them, Zethkayla realized. 3 centuries of pretending to be grateful students, and they've been preparing for war. The tactical implications were staggering. The Council's fleet was powerful, but it was designed for peacekeeping operations against client species with known capabilities. If humanity had developed unknown technologies, if they had been building ships in secret, if they had been preparing for exactly this confrontation for 3 centuries, then the Council's overwhelming superiority was suddenly very much in question. Sir, Veltar reported, his voice carrying unusual tension. We're receiving a communication from Earth. Official diplomatic channels, maximum priority. Display it. The communication came not from usual sources, the Compliance Ministry or the Colonial Administration, but from someone identifying herself as Admiral Maria Santos of the Human Heritage Foundation. The title meant nothing to Zethkayla, but the woman's bearing and the confidence in her voice suggested someone accustomed to command authority. Ambassador Zethkayla, she said, looking directly into the camera with eyes that showed no trace of the deference he had come to expect from human officials. Welcome to Earth. We understand you're here to conduct a comprehensive review of humanity's integration into the galactic community. That is correct, Zethkayla responded, though he was already beginning to understand that this review would be unlike any he had conducted before. Excellent. We've been preparing for this conversation for quite some time. We have a great deal to discuss about humanity's place in the galaxy and about some misconceptions that may have developed during our integration period. The communication ended, leaving Zethkayla staring at the display with a growing sense that he had dramatically misunderstood the situation. Admiral Santos hadn't spoken like a grateful client species preparing for evaluation. She had spoken like an equal preparing for negotiation, or like a military commander preparing for war. Subcommander, what do our files show about Admiral Maria Santos? No record of that individual in any official human government or military position, sir. According to our databases, no such person exists, which meant that for 3 centuries, while the Council had been monitoring humanity's official activities, the humans had been building an entirely parallel command structure. Ships they couldn't see, technologies they didn't recognize, leaders they had never heard of, and capabilities they had never suspected. Zethkayla moved to his private command station and opened a priority communication to the Council's High Command. For the first time in 12,000 years, a comprehensive review was about to encounter a species that had prepared for exactly this moment. The question was whether the Council was prepared for what humanity had become while pretending to be grateful students. As his communication request traveled across the galaxy toward the Council's central worlds, Zethkayla studied the tactical display one more time. 12 Council ships, representing the finest military technology in the galaxy, approaching a world that had supposedly been disarmed 3 centuries ago. But somewhere in human space, hidden by technologies the Council had never imagined, ships were moving into position for a confrontation that would determine whether humanity remained grateful students or reminded the galaxy why Earth had remained silent for so long. The comprehensive review was about to begin, but Zethkayla was beginning to suspect that the humans had been conducting their own review for the past 300 years. And they had apparently reached some very different conclusions about humanity's place in the galactic community. The Council chamber aboard the Eternal Harmony had been designed to impress client species with the magnificence and authority of galactic civilization. Representatives from 12 different Council species sat in positions that emphasized their technological superiority and cultural refinement, while holographic displays showed the vast extent of Council space, 12,000 years of expansion, conquest, and integration spanning half the galaxy. Ambassador Zethkayla had used this chamber 47 times before to conduct comprehensive reviews, and in every case, the subject species had entered with defiance and left with submission. The sheer scale of council power, combined with the obvious futility of resistance, had always proven sufficient to convince even the most stubborn species to accept their designated place in the galactic order. Today will be different. Admiral Maria Santos entered the chamber accompanied by two other humans, Dr. Sarah Chun, whose defection from the Compliance Ministry had been noted but not considered significant, and General Patricia Reyes, who was officially retired but whose bearing suggested otherwise. None of the three humans showed any of the awe or intimidation that Zeth Kaler had come to expect from first-time visitors to a council flagship. Admiral Santos, Zeth Kaler began, his head patterns displaying the formal frequencies of official welcome. We trust you understand the purpose of this comprehensive review. The Council seeks to evaluate humanity's progress toward full galactic integration and to provide guidance for your species' continued development. We understand perfectly, Admiral Santos replied, taking her seat at the small table provided for human representatives. We've been studying the Council's integration methods for quite some time. In fact, we've become quite knowledgeable about your procedures. Something in her tone made Zeth Kaler's head patterns shift slightly. The Admiral wasn't speaking like someone seeking approval. She was speaking like someone stating facts. Excellent. Then, you will appreciate the significance of this review. Humanity has shown remarkable compliance during your integration period, but recent anomalies suggest that some elements within human space may be engaging in unauthorized activities. Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly. What kind of unauthorized activities? The development of prohibited technologies, the maintenance of obsolete communication networks, and the construction of facilities that exceed approved parameters. Zeth Kaler activated the chamber's main display, showing the energy signatures and construction activities that Council sensors had detected throughout human space. Such activities are contrary to the spirit of grateful membership that has characterized human Council relations. Admiral Santos studied the display for a moment, then looked directly at Zeth Kaler. Ambassador, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of human membership in the galactic community. Please explain. Humanity never requested membership in the Council. You arrived uninvited, imposed your authority without consent, and then spent 3 centuries systematically dismantling every achievement our species had made. You call it integration. We have other words for it. The chamber fell silent. In 12,000 years of Council history, no species under review had ever spoken so directly about the integration process. Client species typically focused on their gratitude for Council guidance, their appreciation for the benefits of galactic civilization, and their desire to continue learning proper behavior. Counselor Thexmar, a crystal-skinned Altarian whose role was to provide historical context during reviews, activated his own display. Admiral, perhaps you misunderstand the benefits your species has received. Humanity's lifespan has nearly doubled under Council guidance. Your wars have ended, your diseases have been eliminated, your poverty has been abolished. These achievements would have been impossible without Council intervention. You're absolutely right, General Reyes responded. Those achievements would have been impossible without your intervention, because you made them impossible by systematically destroying our capacity for independent achievement. She gestured to the displays around the chamber. Every technology you've given us came with restrictions that prevented us from understanding how it worked. Every medical advance was provided as a finished product rather than knowledge we could build upon. Every solution to our problems created new dependencies that required continued Council oversight. Zeth Kaler's head patterns began displaying the warning frequencies that indicated growing concern. This wasn't following the standard pattern of comprehensive reviews. The humans weren't defending their unauthorized activities or seeking forgiveness for their noncompliance. They were questioning the fundamental assumptions of the integration process. Admiral Santos, he said carefully, the Council's guidance system has been refined over 12,000 years and has successfully integrated thousands of species into galactic civilization. The limitations you mention are necessary safeguards that prevent developing species from causing harm to themselves or others. Safeguardes admiral santos repeated. Is that what you call the systematic suppression of human innovation? The prohibition of technologies that might make us too independent? The cultural modifications that turned us from explorers into students? She stood up, moving to one of the chamber's auxiliary displays. With your permission, Ambassador, I'd like to show you something. Without waiting for his response, she activated her own data interface. The display filled with technical schematics, historical records, and analytical data that made several council representatives lean forward with sudden interest. For 3 centuries, humanity has been keeping records, not just of our own development, but of the council's integration methods as applied to other species. We've studied your techniques, analyzed your patterns, and learned quite a lot about how you've managed to maintain control over half the galaxy for 12,000 years. The schematics on the display were immediately recognizable to the council representatives. They were detailed plans of council technology, communication protocols, and strategic deployment patterns. But they also showed something else, clear evidence that humans understood how those systems worked at a level that should have been impossible for a client species. How did you acquire this information? Counselor Veldin, a 4-armed Regelian, demanded. Dr. Chen answered, the same way humanity acquired most of our important knowledge over the past 3 centuries. We never stopped learning, and we never stopped teaching each other. You assumed that destroying our official research institutions would end our capacity for innovation. You forgot that humans have been sharing knowledge through unofficial networks for thousands of years. Zethkaler studied the displays with growing alarm. The level of detail was extraordinary. The humans hadn't just maintained their own prohibited research, they had conducted sophisticated intelligence operations against the Council itself. They knew about fleet deployment patterns, communication protocols, and strategic doctrines that were classified at the highest levels of Council security. This intelligence gathering was unauthorized and potentially treasonous, he stated. To commit treason, we would have to be citizens of your galactic community, Admiral Santos replied. But we were never given citizenship. We were given supervised integration. There's a difference. She activated another section of her display, showing archaeological data from dozens of worlds across the galaxy. Dr. Elena Vasquez has spent years studying the remains of species that underwent Council integration. Would you like to know what she found? Before Zethkaler could respond, the display filled with images from archaeological sites across Council space. Ancient cities, advanced technologies, and cultural artifacts from civilizations that had supposedly benefited from Council guidance. But the evidence told a different story. Species that had once built great works were reduced to maintaining Council-provided infrastructure. Civilizations that had once reached for the stars were content to manage their assigned roles in the galactic economy. 47 species, Dr. Chen said quietly. 47 civilizations that showed the same innovative potential that humanity once possessed. All of them successfully integrated into the galactic community. All of them now content to be grateful students rather than independent peoples. The chamber was absolutely silent. The Council representatives were staring at evidence of their own systematic suppression of galactic development, documented with a thoroughness that was both impressive and deeply troubling. What exactly are you proposing? Zethkaler asked. Admiral Santos returned to her seat, her expression resolute. We're not proposing anything, Ambassador. We're stating our position. Humanity formally rejects the authority of the Galactic Council. We revoke our consent to supervised integration. We reclaim our right to independent development, and we demand recognition as a sovereign species within our own territory. The words hit the chamber like a physical blow. In 12,000 years of Council history, no species had ever formally rejected Council authority once integration had begun. The legal, political, and strategic implications were staggering. That is not possible, Counselor Thexmar said slowly. Integration is irreversible. Your species has been dependent on Council technology for 3 centuries. Your economy is integrated into galactic trade networks. Your people have adapted to galactic cultural standards. Independence would be catastrophic for humanity. General Reyes smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. That's where you made your first mistake, Counselor. You assumed we had become dependent on your technology because we stopped using our own. In reality, we simply learned to be more careful about where and how we used it. She activated her own interface, and the chamber's displays filled with images that made every council representative stiffen in shock. Ships, dozens of them, emerging from hidden facilities throughout human space. Not council designs or crude imitations of galactic technology, but distinctly human vessels that incorporated design principles the council had never seen. The energy signatures your sensors detected, Admiral Santos explained, were our shipyards moving to full operational status. We've been building these vessels for decades, using technologies that we developed independently and refined without your guidance. Zeth Kaler stared at the tactical display as more human ships became visible. They were unlike anything in the Council's databases, sleek, functional designs that suggested capabilities the Council couldn't immediately assess. More importantly, there were far more of them than should have been possible. How many, he asked. Enough, General Reyes replied. But it was Counselor Veldin who asked the crucial question. What do you want? Admiral Santos leaned back in her chair. Recognition of humanity's right to exist as an independent species. Withdrawal of all council oversight from human territory. Formal acknowledgement that the integration process was conducted without proper consent and will not be imposed on other species without explicit agreement. Impossible, Zeth Kaler said immediately. The Council cannot set such a precedent. If humanity is allowed to reject integration, other species will demand the same right. The stability of galactic civilization depends on unified authority. Then, you have a problem, Dr. Chen observed, because humanity is rejecting integration regardless of whether you consider it possible. Zeth Kaler activated his own command interface, bringing up tactical assessments of the human fleet now visible throughout the system. The numbers were concerning. Humanity had somehow managed to build and deploy a substantial military force without council detection. But 12,000 years of galactic supremacy couldn't be challenged by one species, no matter how well prepared they might be. Admiral Santos, you are clearly intelligent people. You must understand that resistance is futile. The Council commands resources beyond your imagination. Our fleets span the galaxy. Our technologies surpass anything humanity has developed, and our experience in dealing with rebellious species is extensive. Admiral Santos nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right about your experience with rebellious species. In fact, we've studied that experience quite carefully. Would you like to know what we learned? Before he could respond, she continued. We learned that the Council has never faced a species that spent centuries preparing for exactly this confrontation. Every other species that challenged Council authority did so shortly after first contact, when they were still operating from incomplete information. They fought with inferior technology, limited coordination, and insufficient understanding of their opponent. She gestured to the displays showing human ships throughout the system. Humanity has advantages that no previous species possessed. We've had 300 years to study council methods, technology, and strategic thinking. We've maintained our own technological development in secret while appearing to accept yours. Most importantly, we've prepared for this specific scenario while you've assumed it could never happen. General Reyes activated another display, showing strategic analyses that made the council representatives exchange worried glances. We know how your fleets are deployed, how your command structures operate, and how your political system responds to crises. We've identified critical vulnerabilities in your supply networks, communication systems, and administrative infrastructure. More importantly, Dr. Chen added, we know how to share this information with other species who might be interested in reconsidering their own integration status. The threat was clear and devastating. If humanity's rebellion succeeded, If they could demonstrate that Council authority could be successfully challenged, it would encourage similar movements throughout Council space. The stability that had been maintained for 12,000 years could collapse as dozens of integrated species reconsidered their willing participation in galactic civilization. Zethkaler found himself facing a scenario that no Council protocol had anticipated. His fleet was outnumbered, his authority was being directly challenged, and his opponents had spent centuries preparing for exactly this confrontation. Worse yet, they clearly understood the broader implications of their actions, and were prepared to destabilize the entire galactic order if necessary. What assurances can you provide that humanity will not share its resistance methods with other species? He asked. Admiral Santos's expression remained neutral. None whatsoever. In fact, we consider it our moral obligation to share this information with any species that requests it. The right to self-determination shouldn't be restricted to humanity. The chamber fell silent again as the full implications became clear. This wasn't just a challenge to Council authority over humanity. It was a challenge to the fundamental principle of integration that had shaped galactic civilization for 12,000 years. But it was Counselor Thexmar who finally spoke the word that changed everything. Kether, he said quietly. The chamber erupted. Admiral Santos and her companions were on their feet instantly. Dr. Chen's face showing rage that had been suppressed for decades, General Reyes reaching for weapons that weren't there, and Admiral Santos herself displaying an expression of cold fury that made the chamber's environmental systems register a measurable drop in temperature. "What did you just call us?" Admiral Santos asked, her voice deadly quiet. Zethkaler realized immediately that Counselor Thexmar had made a catastrophic error, but the damage was already done. Kethera, the Council term for grateful client species who knew their place, was never supposed to be used in direct communication with the subjects themselves. It was a private designation, used in Council deliberations to categorize species that had accepted their role as permanent students rather than potential equals. "I believe," Admiral Santos continued, "that we've just learned exactly what the Council thinks of humanity's place in the galactic community. Thank you for clarifying the situation, Counselor. You just made this much easier." She activated her communication interface, establishing contact with human forces throughout the system. "All units, this is Admiral Santos. Operation Renaissance is now active. Repeat, Operation Renaissance is now active." Throughout human space, ships that had been hidden for decades began moving toward predetermined positions. Facilities that had operated in secret began broadcasting on frequencies that had been silent for 3 centuries. And across dozens of human worlds, populations that had spent 3 centuries learning to be grateful students remembered why their ancestors had once reached for the stars. Earth's silence was over, and the galaxy was about to learn what humanity had been preparing for during those 3 centuries of careful, patient, grateful compliance. The first shots of the war were not fired by weapons. They were fired by information. Within minutes of Admiral Santos activating Operation Renaissance, every human colony in the galaxy began broadcasting on frequencies that had been silent since before Council contact. The transmissions weren't random. They were coordinated data dumps containing 3 centuries of accumulated intelligence about the Council's integration methods, technological dependencies, and strategic vulnerabilities. More importantly, they were broadcasting archaeological evidence that proved beyond doubt what had happened to the dozens of species that had undergone successful integration over the past 12,000 years. Ambassador Zethkaler watched the communication networks of his flagship strain under the sudden load as human transmissions flooded every available channel. His communications officers were frantically trying to block the signals, but the humans were using transmission protocols that predated Council surveillance systems, obsolete technologies that had been dismissed as primitive but which proved remarkably resistant to modern interference techniques. "Sir," Subcommander Veltar reported, "the human transmissions are being received and retransmitted by unauthorized stations throughout Council space." We're detecting response signals from at least 14 different species territories. Which species? The Denebians, the Capellans, the Wolfpack Collective, and others. All species that underwent integration within the past 5,000 years. It appears they maintained some form of independent communication capability despite Council oversight. Zethkaler felt a chill that had nothing to do with the flagship's environmental systems. The humans hadn't just prepared for rebellion against the Council. They had prepared to inspire rebellion throughout Council space. The information they were broadcasting would reach species that had been integrated so successfully that they had forgotten they had ever been independent. On the tactical display, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Human ships were emerging from hidden positions throughout the system, their numbers growing far beyond what should have been possible. Worse yet, they were demonstrating capabilities that Council databases couldn't explain. Ships moving at velocities that exceeded known human propulsion technology, energy signatures that suggested power generation methods the Council had never encountered, and, most troubling of all, coordination and tactical execution that spoke of decades of planning and preparation. Admiral Santos, Zethkaler said, activating the communication channel to the human representatives still aboard his flagship. You must understand that this rebellion cannot succeed. The Council commands resources throughout the galaxy. Even if you achieve some initial victories, you cannot sustain resistance against 12,000 years of accumulated power. Admiral Santos looked directly into the communication display, and Zethkaler was struck by the complete absence of doubt in her expression. Ambassador, you're still thinking like someone who believes the Council's version of galactic history. You assume that 12,000 years of expansion represents 12,000 years of strength. But we've studied your archaeological records, and we know better. She activated her data interface, filling the communication channel with images that made Zethkaler's head patterns shift to frequencies of deep alarm. The images showed Council worlds, not the gleaming administrative centers and technological marvels that represented the public face of galactic civilization, but the hidden archaeological sites that told a different story. The Council didn't build galactic civilization, Admiral Santos continued. You inherited it. Every major technological advancement in Council space can be traced back to species that were integrated into your community. The faster-than-light drives that power your fleets were developed by the Andromedans before they were absorbed into your bureaucracy. The medical technologies that extended lifespans were created by the Helix Collective before they were reclassified as a protected species. Even the communication systems that maintain your authority were originally designed by the Spiral Confederacy before they conveniently disappeared from galactic politics. The implications were staggering. If the humans were correct, the Council hadn't been guiding galactic development for 12,000 years. They had been harvesting it. Each integrated species had contributed their greatest achievements to the collective whole before being carefully managed into comfortable dependency. Dr. Vasquez spent years documenting the pattern, General Reyes added. Species integration follows a predictable timeline. First, the subject species is overwhelmed by the apparent superiority of Council technology. Next, they're gradually weaned away from their own innovations in favor of Council-provided solutions. Finally, they're absorbed into support roles that utilize their unique capabilities while preventing independent development. Dr. Chun leaned forward. The archaeological evidence shows that every major advancement in Council civilization came from a recently integrated species. Innovation doesn't happen in Council space. It happens in independent civilizations that are then absorbed into the collective. Zethkaler studied the data streaming across his displays, cross-referencing it against Council historical records. The correlations were undeniable. Every technological breakthrough in Council history coincided with the integration of a new species. Every period of stagnation corresponded with extended periods without new integrations. What you're suggesting, he said slowly, is that the Council has been parasitic rather than symbiotic. We're not suggesting it, Admiral Santos replied. We're stating it as documented fact. The Council maintains power by harvesting the innovations of independent species, then managing those species into dependency to prevent them from developing beyond Council control. She gestured to the tactical display, where human ships were now clearly visible throughout the system in numbers that defied Council estimates. But there's something you never anticipated. What happens when a species spends 3 centuries studying your methods while secretly maintaining their own development? The answer was becoming apparent on every screen in the Council chamber. Human ships were demonstrating tactical coordination that exceeded anything in Council databases. Their weapons were inflicting damage patterns that suggested technologies the Council had never encountered. Most importantly, they were executing a strategic plan that showed intimate knowledge of Council capabilities and limitations. How? Veltor demanded. How did you maintain technological development without our knowledge? General Reyes smiled. The same way humans have always preserved important knowledge. We told stories. Every human child grew up hearing stories about the time before Council contact. Stories about human achievements, human innovations, human ways of solving problems. You thought you were allowing harmless cultural preservation. In reality, you were allowing us to maintain our institutional memory. Dr. Chen continued the explanation. Combined with carefully preserved physical evidence in archaeological sites you classified as culturally protected, we maintained access to our pre-contact technological base. We just learned to develop it quietly. More importantly, Admiral Santos added, we learned to develop it specifically as a counter to Council methods. Every technology we created, every strategic doctrine we developed, every weapon we built, all of it designed specifically to neutralize the advantages that have kept the Council in power for 12,000 years. The tactical display was now showing a situation that Zeth Kaler had never encountered in 47 comprehensive reviews. The Council fleet was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and facing opponents who clearly understood their capabilities better than they understood human capabilities. Sir, Veltar reported, we're receiving communication requests from Council High Command. They're demanding a status report on the comprehensive review. Zeth Kaler realized that he was about to make the first report in Council history that declared a comprehensive review had failed. Not just failed, had triggered a rebellion that was already spreading beyond human space as the archaeological evidence reached other integrated species. Admiral Santos, he said, what are your terms? Unconditional withdrawal of all Council forces from human territory. Recognition of humanity as a sovereign species with a right to independent development. Full disclosure of Council integration methods to all current client species. And formal acknowledgement that integration without explicit consent constitutes conquest rather than cooperation. Those terms are impossible. The Council cannot set such precedents without destabilizing galactic civilization. Admiral Santos nodded. We understand your position perfectly. The question is whether you understand ours. She activated a final display that made every Council representative in the chamber stare in shock. It was a real-time tactical overview of the entire galaxy, showing the positions of Council fleets, human ships, and, most importantly, the response signals that were now coming from dozens of supposedly integrated species throughout Council space. You see, Ambassador, we didn't just prepare to fight the Council. We prepare to teach other species how to fight the Council. The information we're broadcasting includes detailed intelligence about Council fleet deployments, supply lines, communication protocols, and strategic doctrines. More importantly, it includes technical specifications for technologies that can be built using resources available to any integrated species. General Reyes pointed to clusters of signals throughout the galaxy. The Danubians have apparently maintained some form of independent industrial capacity. The Wolfpack Collective never fully dismantled their military infrastructure. The Capellans have been secretly developing technologies that your databases never recorded. In short, Dr. Chun concluded, humanity isn't fighting this war alone. We're fighting it as part of a coalition that includes every species that was never asked whether they wanted to be grateful students for the rest of eternity. The chamber fell silent as the full scope of the situation became clear. This wasn't a local rebellion that could be suppressed with superior firepower. This was a galactic revolution that had been planned for centuries and coordinated across dozens of species' territories simultaneously. How long? Zeth Kaler asked quietly. How long have we been planning this? Admiral Santos asked. Since the day the Council declared us successfully integrated. How long have we been in contact with other species? Since the day we realized we weren't the first civilization to be absorbed into grateful dependency. She stood up, moving to face the chamber's main display that showed the Council's 12,000-year expansion across the galaxy. The Council's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. You became so confident in your methods, so certain of your superiority, that you stopped adapting to new challenges. You assumed that every species would follow the same pattern. Initial resistance followed by gradual acceptance. But humans don't accept gradual anything, General Reyes added. We innovate, we adapt, and we remember. Most importantly, we teach our children to ask questions rather than accept answers. Dr. Chun activated her data interface one final time, displaying information that made Zeth Kaler's head patterns shift to frequencies of despair. The archaeological evidence we've gathered isn't just about the past, it's about the future. Every integrated species still possesses the genetic, cultural, and intellectual heritage that made them innovative before Council contact. They just need to remember how to use it. Admiral Santos returned to her seat, her expression resolute. Ambassador, the Council can choose to fight a war against half the galaxy, or it can choose to negotiate a transition to a system that respects the right of species to determine their own development paths. But the era of grateful students accepting wisdom from elder species is over. Zeth Kaler looked around the chamber at his fellow Council representatives, seeing the same realization in their expressions that he felt in his own mind. For 12,000 years, the Council had maintained power through a simple premise, that their experience and accumulated knowledge made them natural leaders of galactic civilization. But the humans had just demonstrated that experience could be studied,